The morning sun sparkled through the large windows of Sewell International Airport. Flight 287 to New York was getting ready for takeoff. People walked quickly through the terminal, pulling their bags and checking their phones. Among them was Captain Lee Jin-ho, though today he wasn't wearing his Space Force uniform. Instead, he had on simple black pants and a neat blue sweater. His military boots were replaced by regular shoes, and his many medals were safely packed in his bag. Today, he was traveling as a regular person, heading home after visiting his grandmother in Seoul. Jin-ho checked his ticket again. Seat 14C. He had picked an aisle seat because he liked to help other passengers with their bags. 20 years of military service had made helping others a habit for him. As he walked down the plane's aisle, Jin-ho noticed a well-dressed woman already sitting in 14B. She was busy typing on her expensive laptop. Her designer bag sat in his empty seat, and she hadn't looked up when he stopped next to her. "Excuse me," Jin-ho said politely. "I believe that's my seat." Mrs. Park Mi-suk looked up from her screen, her eyes moving from his face to his casual clothes. Her friendly expression changed quickly to a frown. She didn't move her bag. "I prefer not to sit next to. You're kind," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Can't you find another seat?" The plane went quiet. Several passengers turned to look. Jin-ho stayed calm, his hands relaxed at his sides. He had faced worse situations in space stations and during first contact missions with alien species. A prejudiced woman on a plane wasn't going to upset him. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "this is my assigned seat. Would you please move your bag?" Mi-suk pressed the call button. A flight attendant came quickly, probably having noticed the tension. "Is there a problem?" the flight attendant asked, looking between them. "Yes," Mi-suk said sharply. "I don't feel comfortable sitting next to him. Can you move me to another seat, preferably in first class?" The flight attendant's face showed disapproval, but she stayed professional. "I apologize, Mrs. Park, but the flight is completely full. There are no other seats available, not even in first class." "Then move him," Mi-suk demanded, pointing at Jin-ho. "Surely you can find him a seat in the back of the plane." More passengers were watching now. Some looked angry at Mi-suk's behavior. Others seemed uncomfortable. A few had their phones out, probably recording. The flight attendant stood straighter. "Mrs. Park, we don't discriminate against passengers on this airline. This is Mr. Lee's assigned seat. If you're uncomfortable, you're welcome to take a different flight." Jin-ho raised his hand slightly. "It's okay," he said to the flight attendant. "I don't mind sitting here." He turned to Mi-suk. "Ma'am, we have a long flight ahead. I promise I won't bother you. I'll probably sleep most of the way." Mi-suk made an angry sound but finally moved her bag. Jin-ho put his carry-on in the overhead bin and sat down. He could feel her moving as far away from him as possible in her seat. As the plane started to fill up, Jin-ho took out a book about space engineering. It was written by his friend, another Space Force captain who had helped design the first faster-than-light engine. The cover showed a beautiful photo of Earth from space, but Jin-ho had seen that view in person many times. Mi-suk kept giving him sideways looks, especially when he helped an elderly couple put their heavy bags in the overhead bin. She seemed annoyed that other passengers were thanking him and smiling at him. The flight attendant who had helped earlier walked past and quietly asked if he was okay. Jin-ho nodded with a small smile. In his years of service, he had learned that some people's minds were harder to change than the laws of physics, but he had also learned that sometimes the best response to hatred was simple kindness. As the plane took off, Jin-ho thought about his grandmother's words from that morning. "You make us proud," she had said, hugging him goodbye. "Not because of your medals or your rank, but because of your heart." He opened his book and started reading, ignoring Mi-suk's constant annoyed glances. The plane climbed higher into the sky, carrying its passengers toward New York. None of them knew that in a few hours, their lives would change forever, and the true test of character would begin. My-suk pulled out her phone as soon as the seatbelt sign went off. She started typing quickly, probably complaining on social media about having to sit next to him. Jin-ho just kept reading his book. The chapter was about how Earth's first contact with alien species had changed space travel forever. A young boy from the row behind them leaned forward. "What are you reading?" he asked Jin-ho. Before Jin-ho could answer, My-suk turned around. "Don't talk to him," she told the boy's parents. "You don't know what kind of person he is." The boy's father, a tall man with kind eyes, looked at My-suk coldly. "I think we can all see exactly what kind of person he is," he said. "And what kind of person you are too." My-suk's face turned red. She put on her headphones and turned away, but Jin-ho could see her hands shaking with anger as she typed on her phone. The flight attendant started serving drinks. When they reached row 14, the attendant smiled warmly at Jin-ho. "Would you like anything to drink, Captain? I mean, sir." Jin-ho noticed her almost using his rank again. She must have recognized him from the military transport flights. "Just water, please," he said quietly. My-suk looked up at the word captain, but then went back to her phone. She ordered an expensive wine and complained that it wasn't the brand she wanted. As the plane flew over the Pacific Ocean, Jin-ho thought about his next mission. In 2 weeks, he would command humanity's newest starship on a peace mission to a distant galaxy. His crew was made up of people from all over Earth, a beautiful example of how humanity had grown since the old days of prejudice and hate, or at least most of humanity had grown. He looked at My-suk, who was now watching a movie on her laptop, still sitting as far from him as possible. She had no idea that the person she was trying so hard to avoid had helped save Earth 3 times. She didn't know that he had been the first human to shake hands with the leaders of the Centauri Alliance, or that his quick thinking had prevented a war that could have destroyed both their worlds. But Jin-ho didn't need her to know these things. His grandmother had taught him that true respect wasn't about medals or uniforms. It was about how you treated others, especially those who treated you badly. The plane continued its journey across the ocean. In a few hours, everything would change. But for now, Jin-ho just read his book, occasionally helping other passengers when they needed it, showing through his actions the very best of what humanity could be. And somewhere high above the clouds, the laws of physics were about to remind everyone on Flight 287 that the only things that really mattered were courage, kindness, and the willingness to help others, no matter what they looked like or where they came from. 3 hours into the flight, most passengers on Flight 287 were either sleeping or watching movies. The plane flew smoothly through the night sky over the Pacific Ocean. Jin-ho had just finished his book and was looking out the window at the stars. Even after all his space missions, he still loved seeing the stars from Earth. My-suk had fallen asleep, her expensive headphones still playing music. Her head was turned as far away from Jin-ho as possible, even in sleep. The flight attendants walked quietly through the cabin, checking on passengers and picking up empty cups. That's when it happened. The first sign was a small shaking in the plane's floor. Jin-ho felt it immediately. His years of flying spaceships had made him sensitive to any unusual vibrations. He sat up straighter, his body becoming alert. The shaking grew stronger. A few passengers looked up from their screens, confused. Then came a loud bang from somewhere in the back of the plane. The oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Chaos broke out instantly. People started screaming. The plane dropped suddenly, making stomachs lurch. Drinks and laptops flew into the air. My-suk woke up with a cry of fear as her wine spilled across her expensive suit. The captain's voice came over the speakers, but it was hard to hear over the noise. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a sudden loss of cabin pressure. Please put on your oxygen masks immediately and stay in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." Jin-ho moved quickly. He grabbed his mask and put it on with practiced ease. Then he turned to help My-suk, who was fumbling with her mask, her hands shaking too much to put it on properly. She tried to push his hands away, But Jin-ho stayed calm. "Ma'am, you need oxygen," he said firmly through his mask. "Let me help you." The plane shook again violently. More screams filled the cabin. Mi-suk stopped fighting and let Jin-ho secure her mask. Her eyes were wide with fear. Jin-ho looked around the cabin. Many passengers were struggling with their masks. Some children were crying. An elderly man 2 rows ahead had passed out before getting his mask on. Making a quick decision, Jin-ho pressed his call button. A flight attendant rushed over, her face worried behind her own oxygen mask. "I'm Captain Lee Jin-ho, Space Force," he said clearly. "I have emergency experience. Do you need help?" The flight attendant's eyes lit up with recognition. "Captain Lee." "Yes, please. We have several passengers who need assistance." Jin-ho unbuckled his seatbelt. Mi-suk grabbed his arm, surprising both of them. "You can't leave," she said through her mask, her voice shaky. "It's not safe." "That's why I have to help," Jin-ho replied simply. He stood up carefully, holding onto the seats as the plane continued to shake. The next few minutes were busy. Jin-ho moved through the cabin, helping where he could. He showed parents how to put masks on small children. He helped the flight attendants lift the unconscious elderly man and got his oxygen mask working properly. When a young woman had a panic attack, he talked to her calmly until she could breathe normally again. The whole time, he kept hearing snippets of worried conversations through the oxygen masks. "Are we going to crash? What's happening? I don't want to die." Jin-ho thought about his first emergency in space when an asteroid had damaged his ship's air supply. He had learned then that panic was more dangerous than any technical problem. People needed a calm presence to follow. He made his way to the front of the plane, where the chief flight attendant was trying to calm a group of frightened passengers. "The pilots are doing everything they can," she was saying. "We're changing course to make an emergency landing. How do we know they can land safely?" Someone shouted, "We're going to crash." Jin-ho stepped forward. "The pilots are highly trained for situations like this," he said in a clear, confident voice that carried through the cabin. "Modern planes have multiple backup systems. Right now, the best thing we can do is stay calm and follow the crew's instructions." Something in his voice made people listen. Maybe it was the authority that came from years of commanding space missions. Maybe it was the quiet confidence that said he had seen worse situations and survived. Mi-suk watched from her seat as Jin-ho organized the passengers and crew. He created a system where calmer passengers would help reassure others. He worked with the flight attendants to make sure everyone had water. When turbulence hit hard, he demonstrated proper bracing positions. The plane started to descend rapidly. Jin-ho returned to his seat as required, but he kept talking in a steady voice, explaining what was happening. "The pilots are taking us to a lower altitude where we can breathe without masks," he said loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "The shaking is normal during descent. The landing gear and flaps make extra noise. But that's all part of normal landing procedures." A small boy in the row behind them started crying. Jin-ho turned around and smiled at him through his mask. "Hey, buddy," he said. "Want to hear about the time I landed a spaceship during a solar storm? That was much bumpier than this." The boy's eyes got wide, and he nodded. As Jin-ho told his story, other passengers listened too. Even Mi-suk found herself leaning slightly closer to hear about the solar storm and the emergency landing on Mars. The plane continued descending. Through the windows, they could see the ocean below, getting closer. An island appeared in the distance, their emergency landing site. "We're diverting to Midway Island," the captain announced. "Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Emergency crews will be standing by." Jin-ho noticed Mi-suk's hands gripping her armrests so tight her knuckles were white. Without saying anything, he reached over and gently tapped her hand. When she looked at him, he gave her a reassuring nod. To everyone's surprise, she didn't pull away. Instead, she asked in a quiet voice, "Have you really landed during worse conditions than this?" "Many times," Jin-ho said. And our pilots are excellent. Listen to the engines. They're functioning perfectly. We're going to be fine." The plane descended through the clouds. Rain hit the windows. The landing would be tricky in these conditions, but Jin-Ho kept his voice confident as he explained each step of the landing process to the nervous passengers around him. As the runway came into view, he thought about how strange life could be. A few hours ago, the woman next to him wouldn't even look at him. Now she was listening to his every word like it was a lifeline. Maybe that was the real lesson here. In space, Jin-Ho had learned that when real danger appeared, things like race and prejudice suddenly seemed very small and silly. What mattered was working together, helping each other, being human. The plane lined up with the runway. Jin-Ho could feel the relief from the flight crew. They had made it this far. But the real test was still to come. The landing would need to be perfect. And as the wheels touched down on the wet runway of Midway Island, Jin-Ho knew that this flight would change more than just their travel plans. It would change hearts and minds too. He just didn't know yet how much. The rain poured down on Midway Island as Flight 287 approached the runway. Emergency vehicles lined both sides of the airstrip, their lights flashing bright red and blue through the storm. Inside the plane, the passengers held their breath. Jin-Ho watched through the window as the ground came closer. His trained eye could tell the pilots were doing an excellent job, keeping the aircraft steady despite the strong winds. Next to him, My-Suk had her eyes closed tightly, her hands still gripping the armrests. The plane's wheels touched the runway with a firm bump. Some passengers gasped. The pilots applied the brakes hard, and everyone leaned forward against their seatbelts. Rain drummed against the windows as the aircraft slowed down. Finally, the plane came to a complete stop. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the cabin burst into applause and cheers. People hugged each other, some crying with relief. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely at Midway Island. Please remain in your seats until we reach the terminal." Emergency crews surrounded the plane immediately. Through the window, Jin-Ho could see firefighters and medical teams approaching in their bright yellow suits. The flight attendants began preparing for evacuation. "Everyone stay calm," the chief flight attendant announced. "We'll exit the plane row by row. Please leave your belongings behind." Jin-Ho noticed an elderly woman a few rows ahead struggling to stand. Her hands were shaking so badly, she couldn't unfasten her seatbelt. Without hesitation, he stood up to help her. This time, My-Suk didn't make any negative comments. She watched silently as Jin-Ho helped the elderly woman up and supported her walk to the exit. More passengers needed help. A mother with 3 small children, a man who had hurt his ankle during the turbulence, a teenage girl having an anxiety attack. The rain had soaked everyone by the time they reached the terminal building. Medical teams checked each passenger, giving special attention to those who had been affected by the loss of cabin pressure. Airport staff handed out blankets and hot drinks. Jin-Ho worked with the flight attendants, helping organize the confused and worried passengers. He spoke to the airport manager, explaining what had happened during the flight. His calm presence and clear thinking helped bring order to the chaos. "Everyone, please listen," Jin-Ho called out to the crowd of passengers. "The airport staff is arranging hotel rooms for all of us. Medical teams are here if anyone needs help. Please stay in the terminal until we have more information about continuing our journey." People gathered around him, asking questions. How long would they stay on the island? When could they get their luggage? What caused the problem with the plane? Jin-Ho answered each question patiently, explaining things in simple terms that everyone could understand. My-Suk stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. She saw how people trusted Jin-Ho, how they calmed down when he spoke to them. She noticed how he remembered everyone's names and problems, making sure each person got the help they needed. A small boy tugged at Jin-Ho's sleeve. It was the same child who had been crying during the landing. "Are you really a spaceship captain?" he asked. Jin-Ho knelt down to the boy's level. "Yes, I am," he said with a kind smile. "But today, I'm just trying to help, like everyone else here." The boy's mother stepped forward. "Thank you for what you did on the plane," she said, "for helping us with the oxygen masks, for keeping everyone calm. You saved lives today." More people joined in, sharing stories of how Jin-ho had helped them during the crisis. Mi-suk listened to each story, her expression changing slowly from doubt to surprise to something that looked like shame. The airport manager returned with news. "We've arranged rooms at the island's hotel," he announced. "Buses will take you there in groups. We're working on getting another plane here to continue your journey to New York, but it might take until tomorrow." As people lined up for the buses, Jin-ho stayed behind to help those who needed extra assistance. He made sure the elderly woman had her medicine. He found a warm blanket for a shivering child. He spoke to the medical team about passengers who might need special attention. Mi-suk watched all this from her seat in the terminal. She had taken out her phone several times, probably to post on social media, but each time she put it away without typing anything. Something had changed in her eyes. The angry, superior look was gone, replaced by thoughtfulness. The rain continued outside, but inside the terminal, something remarkable was happening. People from different backgrounds, who had been strangers just hours ago, were helping each other. They shared snacks, offered phone chargers, comforted crying children. And at the center of it all was Jin-ho, the man Mi-suk had refused to sit next to at the start of the flight. The man she had judged without knowing anything about him. The man who had just helped save everyone on board. As the last bus prepared to leave for the hotel, Jin-ho finally sat down to rest. A flight attendant brought him a cup of coffee and thanked him again for his help. He looked tired but satisfied, knowing everyone was safe. Mi-suk stood up, gathering her courage. She walked slowly toward Jin-ho, stopping a few feet away. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "I was wrong about you." Jin-ho looked up at her, his expression gentle. "We're all wrong sometimes," he replied. "What matters is learning from our mistakes." Mi-suk opened her mouth to say more, but the airport manager called out that the last bus was leaving. The conversation would have to wait. As they walked to the bus together, Mi-suk realized she had a lot to think about. What she didn't know was that the next morning would bring even bigger surprises. The true identity of the man she had insulted was about to become very public, and her perspective on life was about to change forever. The next morning dawned bright and clear on Midway Island. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fresh, clean sky. Mi-suk woke up early in her hotel room, feeling strange after the events of yesterday. She reached for her phone, a habit she couldn't break, and opened her news feed. Her coffee cup nearly fell from her hand. There, on every major news website, was a familiar face, the same face she had turned away from on the plane. The same person she had insulted. But now he was wearing a different outfit, a pristine Space Force uniform covered in medals and honors. The headlines read, "Space Force Captain Saves 287 Lives in Mid-Air Crisis, and Heroic Actions of Decorated Officer Prevent Disaster over Pacific." Mi-suk's hands trembled as she read the articles. They described Captain Lee Jin-ho's impressive career, youngest captain in Space Force history, leader of the first successful diplomatic mission to the Centauri system, three-time recipient of the Global Peace Medal. The man she had refused to sit next to was one of Earth's most decorated heroes. In the hotel's breakfast room, everyone was talking about the news. Passengers from Flight 287 shared their stories with reporters who had somehow made it to the island. The morning news shows played video clips taken by passengers during the crisis. "Captain Lee's quick thinking and leadership saved us all," one passenger told the cameras. "He knew exactly what to do when the oxygen masks dropped. He helped my grandmother when she couldn't breathe," another passenger said. "He stayed calm and made sure everyone was safe." Mi-suk watched the television in silence. More details about Jin-ho's career appeared on the screen. He had commanded the first peaceful contact mission, with an alien civilization. He had prevented an interstellar war through skilled diplomacy. His space missions had opened new trading routes that brought prosperity to Earth. One news channel showed footage from 3 years ago. Jin-ho receiving the Global Unity Award from the World Council. In his acceptance speech, he had said, "The stars taught us an important lesson. Up there, we're not Korean or American or Chinese. We're all human. That's all that matters." The hotel lobby filled with reporters as the morning went on. They interviewed passengers, flight attendants, and airport staff. Everyone had a story about how Jin-ho had helped during the crisis. Then something unexpected happened. Social media had exploded with a different kind of story. Someone had posted a video from the beginning of the flight, the moment when Mi-suk had refused to sit next to Jin-ho. The video went viral within hours. Mi-suk saw people in the hotel looking at her and whispering. She heard fragments of their conversations. "That's her. Can you believe how she treated him?" And he still helped her with her oxygen mask. She felt sick to her stomach, not just from embarrassment, but from genuine shame. She thought about how Jin-ho had remained professional and kind despite her behavior, how he had helped her without hesitation when the crisis began, how he had reassured her during the emergency landing. On the television, they showed more footage of Jin-ho's career. There he was, shaking hands with alien diplomats, commanding advanced starships, receiving honors from world leaders. In every video, he showed the same quiet dignity she had seen on the plane. A group of reporters approached her in the hotel lobby. "Mrs. Park, what do you have to say about your treatment of Captain Lee? Did you know who he was? How do you feel now?" Mi-suk couldn't answer. She hurried back to her room, but she couldn't escape the truth. The internet was full of comments about the video. People called her names. They shared stories of their own experiences with Prejudice. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from people who would recognize her. In her room, Mi-suk sat on the bed and cried. She cried not just because people were angry at her, but because she finally saw the truth about herself. She had judged a hero based on nothing but his appearance. She had shown the worst of humanity to someone who represented its best. The television in her room showed more news about Jin-ho. They interviewed his colleagues from the Space Force. They all said the same things. He was humble, kind, professional, and treated everyone with respect, regardless of their background. "Captain Lee believes in humanity's potential," his commanding officer said on the news. "He's proved it countless times in space, dealing with advanced civilizations. But he says the real test isn't how we handle aliens, it's how we treat each other here on Earth." Mi-suk thought about those words. She remembered how Jin-ho had helped everyone on the plane, even those who had been unkind to him. She thought about his calm voice during the crisis, his patient explanations, his gentle reassurance. A new video appeared on the news. Footage from one of Jin-ho's space missions. He was leading a rescue operation, saving the crew of a damaged ship. The reporter explained that he had risked his own life to help others, just like he had done on Flight 287. Mi-suk made a decision. She couldn't change what she had done, but she could try to make it right. She needed to find Jin-ho and apologize properly, not because he was famous or decorated, but because she had been wrong, and he deserved better. The news said he would be returning to Space Force headquarters as soon as the passengers could continue their journey to New York. Mi-suk knew what she had to do. She would find him there and face the consequences of her actions. As she packed her bags for the continuing journey, Mi-suk looked at herself in the mirror. The woman who had boarded Flight 287 with her prejudices and pride seemed like a stranger now. The events of the past 24 hours had changed something deep inside her. She didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of her transformation. The next few days would teach her even more about humanity, dignity, and the true meaning of character. 1 week after the emergency landing, Mi-suk stood in front of the Space Force headquarters in Washington, D.C. The building reached high into the sky, its walls made of gleaming metal and glass. Ships from Earth and other worlds landed and took off from the roof, their engines humming quietly with advanced technology. My-suk had spent 3 days gathering the courage to come here. She had watched more news about Jin-ho, learning about his achievements. She had read about how he had saved Earth from an asteroid by leading a dangerous mission into space. She had seen interviews with alien diplomats who praised his wisdom and kindness. The security guard at the entrance looked at her carefully. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Captain Lee Jin-ho," My-suk said quietly. "My name is Park My-suk. I was on flight 287. The guard's expression changed. Everyone knew about flight 287 now. "Please wait here," he said, making a call on his communicator. Minutes later, a young officer came to escort her inside. As they walked through the building, My-suk saw images of space missions on the walls. In many of them, she recognized Jin-ho, receiving awards, commanding ships, meeting with leaders from other worlds. They reached a large office with a view of the city. Jin-ho sat behind a desk, wearing his full Space Force uniform. All his medals and honors shone in the morning light. He looked different from the man in the simple sweater on the plane, but his kind eyes were the same. "Mrs. Park," he said, standing up. "Please, sit down." My-suk remained standing. She had practiced this moment many times, but now the words stuck in her throat. Finally, she spoke. "I came to apologize," she said, "not because you're famous or important, but because I was wrong. What I did was shameful." Jin-ho listened quietly as she continued. "I judged you without knowing anything about you," My-suk said. "I showed the worst of human behavior, and you responded with the best. You helped me even after how I treated you. You saved all our lives." Jin-ho gestured to a chair, and this time My-suk sat down. He poured her a cup of tea from a pot on his desk. "Mrs. Park," he said gently, "I accept your apology, but I want to show you something." He pressed a button on his desk, and one wall of the office became a screen. It showed a view of Earth from space. "This is how I see our world every time I go on a mission," Jin-ho said. "From up there, you can't see borders. You can't see differences in skin color. You just see one beautiful planet, home to all of us." He changed the image to show a meeting with alien diplomats. "When I first met the Centauri delegation, they were confused by human prejudices. They said, 'You're all the same species, but you fight because of small differences in appearance. How can you hope to join the galactic community if you can't even accept each other?'" My-suk watched as more images appeared on the screen. Jin-ho's diverse crew working together on space missions, celebrations with alien species, peaceful meetings between worlds. "The stars taught us something important," Jin-ho continued. "Out there, we're all just humans. Our differences become meaningless when we face the vastness of space. What matters is how we treat each other, how we work together, how we help each other in times of crisis." My-suk felt tears in her eyes. "I understand that now," she said, "but I can't undo what I did." "No," Jin-ho agreed, "but you can help change the future. That's why I wanted to meet with you. I have a proposal." He explained that the Space Force was starting a new program to promote diversity in space exploration. They needed someone to share a personal story about overcoming prejudice. "Would you be willing to speak to groups about your experience?" he asked. "About what you learned from Flight 287. Your story could help others change their minds before they make the same mistakes." My-suk was surprised. "You want me to help? After what I did?" Jin-ho smiled. "The best teachers are often those who have learned the hardest lessons themselves." Over the next year, My-suk spoke to thousands of people. She told them about Flight 287, about her shame, and about what she learned. She visited schools to talk about respect and understanding. She helped create a scholarship program for minority students who wanted to join the Space Force. When Jin-ho launched on his next mission to the stars, My-suk watched from the viewing area with tears in her eyes. This time, they were tears of gratitude. The man she had once refused to sit next to had not only saved her life, He had helped her become a better person. The news covered the launch, talking about Jin Ho's achievements. But My Suk thought about the simple things: his patience during the crisis, his kindness to everyone on the plane, his willingness to forgive. As his ship disappeared into the sky, My Suk remembered something Jin Ho had told her during their meeting. The greatest achievement isn't reaching the stars. It's helping others see that we're all walking under the same sky, sharing the same dreams, part of the same human family. She looked up at the stars and smiled. Somewhere up there, Captain Lee Jin-ho was showing the best of humanity to the galaxy. And down here on Earth, she was trying to do the same. The story of Flight 287 became famous. People still talk about it years later, not just about the emergency landing, but about how it changed lives. About how one person's kindness and another's willingness to learn could make the world a little better. And sometimes, on clear nights, when My Suk looks up at the stars, she remembers a simple truth she learned from a space captain on a troubled flight. True heroism isn't just about saving lives. It's about showing others how to live better ones.